Hello, everyone. If you love 3D animation, then my following guest, who is the director of this powerful animated documentary, Eternal Spring, coming to 50 markets in the US and theater release today, October 21st, 2022. Welcome, Jason Loftus. By the way, great film, very powerful, very
Thank
powerful.
you very much. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm going to be honest with you. I saw the film and I was in tears. It's like I had a really inner soul for it. And I'm very picky when it comes to especially types of films like that, but I connected with it, because I'm a very positive person, and I have this feeling about humanity. Totally.
Mm.
And it hit me pretty hard. What I want to know is, how did you come up with the title of the film?
Oh, that's an interesting place to start. So, I mean, first off, Eternal Spring is sort of a play on basically a straight up literal translation of the city's name. Cheung means long or extensive, or in this case, we've chosen eternal as a translation, and Chun means spring. So it's, in one sense, it's just this, a straight literal translation, but there's something more to it than that. And I think maybe you sense that in asking the question.
Right.
I mean, even though these people suffered a lot for their like bold action of hijacking the state TV airwaves in China to counter the party's message about them, and there was a lot of abuse from the authorities afterwards. A lot of people suffered. When I was speaking with these people, the survivors and those who knew those who we cannot reach, I still sense this real sense of hope, and there was just an amazing persistence despite all that they had faced. And so I look at spring as kind of like a Prague spring or an Arab spring, like the way that spring is used to connote this kind of like a movement for freedom, and I sensed that there as well. And I felt like Eternal Spring also communicates this idea that there's this like constant resistance, this real strength and resilience in them. And then there's sort of one more layer to it, which is that, talking about the spirit of these individuals that I witnessed, it really kind of encapsulated for me with this flower that is used in Chinese poetry. It's called meihua, or like a plum blossom flower. And you see when they pull off this TV airwaves heist, even though this persecution of their faith is still going on. They belong to the spiritual group Falun Gong. They're being persecuted. The state media is slandering them constantly, and they have this one moment, this unprecedented interruption in the state's monopoly on information and propaganda, and they break in with their message. It's a fleeting moment, and that the hammer is going to come down really heavily and that people are going to suffer for this. But these people really still felt that they had accomplished something meaningful. And it was kind of like, even though it was going to be suffering, the people who saw their broadcast could never unsee it. And they could never look at the party's propaganda the same way. And that doesn't mean all the Chinese people are going to necessarily become brave and enough to stand up to the Communist Party and all of that right away, but they might be less willing to turn in their neighbors. Like, it has a real impact in sort of shattering and bursting this ideology, this message of hate that had been surrounding them. And so I felt it's like this flower, because the plum blossom flower, it blooms when it's still winter. So it actually communicates this idea that even in the midst of like trying times and difficulty, there's some kind of hope or something better ahead, right? And
Right.
so I felt just a single flower blooming at that moment in that scene in the film really captures this spirit. They've accomplished something, even though they've individually suffered greatly for doing it.
Yeah. Now the illustrator. Let me see if I could pronounce his name right. Daxiong. Did I say it right?
It's close. It's Daxiong. Daxiong. So the X when we use it for Chinese words gives you like an SY sound, like xiong. So Daxiong.
Right. Okay. So, how did you meet up with him? Number one,
Yep.
and how did this is based on true events, so it's a very strong topic, very, and throughout the film, he was always saying that they shouldn't have never, taken over hijacking the TV station and stuff like that. He was always like, very positive about that, saying that, if you do this, something's going to happen. It's illegal. You
Mhm,
can't do that.
mhm,
So how did you connect with him, and why did he want to do this film, and
mhm.
get
So
it out there?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So we were making a kung fu video game a few years ago, and the video game featured some still images, illustrations, because it had a kind of visual novel component to it. And so we learned about this Chinese artist who was living in New York, Daxiong, and he'd drawn for Justice League and Star Wars, and he'd worked with the leading kung fu novelist in China, Jin Yong. So we thought he had the combination of great artistic ability and also the cultural background. And so we invited him up to our studio in Toronto, and we were working on this game. And then we learned about his story and why he had to leave China. And Daxiong actually comes from the same hometown as my wife and producing partner, Masha Loftus. But Masha is not a Falun Gong practitioner. She's not, and she wasn't part of this community. She didn't have contacts in the community that Daxiong belonged to. She was the daughter of a mid-level government official in China. So hearing this story about like what people had been enduring and suffering and the courageous kind of like actions that they were undertaking to counter all the mistreatment they were facing, like all of this happening under her nose in her own city, really hit home for her. For me, I had an interest when I was in high school. I'd had an interest in Eastern philosophy and meditation, and I encountered Falun Gong through that in high school before there was a crackdown. So I found Falun Gong to be something positive, peaceful, and then a year into, like, after I had learned Falun Gong, the Chinese government saying it's evil and dangerous and we need to get rid of these people. And so for me, it was this kind of like contrast between what I had personally experienced and witnessed in this community and what the Chinese government was saying about them. So I just felt this like desire to allow a voice where they could kind of, for them, say what they were all about. But also I just thought it was, both Masha and I felt it was such a remarkable story of these people. They're being persecuted, the government saying they're so bad and they control all of the channels of communication, and then these people hatch a plan to climb the television poles with like home DVD players and play their own video to counter the messaging. It's a very bold and courageous and creative and daring act, and it just is sort of begged to be told on the big screen. So for Daxiong, he's someone who, he had mixed feelings. Like you said, he's obviously sympathetic with the overall goal of like countering the government's propaganda, because he's also part of the Falun Gong community. He felt it was an injustice in terms of how they were being demeaned and slandered. But at the same time, he felt like maybe we poked the bear here. Maybe this is like the pushback, like the consequences were so severe. And so he doesn't know how to view it to begin with. And I liked that he had that question, because I think a lot of people would have that question. It's like, is this overzealous? Like, yeah, you're defending your spiritual faith, but if you get killed, can you still practice your spiritual faith? So people might feel like this is maybe they have a question about whether this is the right action. And so I felt that was a good place to start, because Daxiong was willing to explore that. In fact, he was more than willing. I felt this event really impacted his life, and the prospect of meeting people who knew more about it. And fortunately for us, someone who was a direct participant, like the only surviving TV hijacker who got out of China, who's living in Korea, Mr. White, was really key for this story. And I just think that for Daxiong was this opportunity to kind of provide some answers, to get an understanding of this event and provide some closure in something that really had affected his life, right? So he's been separated from his home since this event. He was forced to flee. He had been detained. He endured torture. There's people he knew who were killed. So all of this stuff is wrapped up in his feelings about this. And it was an opportunity for him to, through his artwork, come to some new understanding and hopefully some kind of healing process through his art. And so we let that artistic process play out on screen. But you can't push someone to do that. I think it was just fortunate timing that Daxiong was ready. He really wanted to understand this event. And the best way for him to process things and to communicate things is through his pen. And so that's what we did.
Well, I think that meeting you and being involved in this whole project is what you guys did was basically connect the dots. I mean, I'm guessing it's inspired you to do the film, right? I mean, is that what inspired you to do this film? Because
But
it
there's a,
fell into place. It felt
Yeah,
like,
there's a combination of things here. There's the obvious like human cost, the humanitarian aspect of a wanting to shine a light on this injustice that is sort of at the root there for sure. And then there's this like remarkable personal story of an artist exploring through his artwork an event that impacted his life. And that gives you, from a filmmaking standpoint, the opportunity to explore the role that art can play in healing, the role that that the artistic process allows us to come to like growth and understanding around something. So I think that was really a unique and exciting opportunity. And you're right, it's really like we're connecting dots in the sense that this story, this heist, it's got all the elements of a Hollywood heist story there. This is like an eclectic band of underdogs who are trying to do something that seems crazy and unattainable, and they hatch a bold plan, but then of course things don't go as planned. So there's all of this, the elements of a heist that are just wrapped up together in this already. And then there's the other side of things, which is like, the real ongoing human rights issue and the artistic thing. And so those things all combined really just was a unique opportunity with this film.
yeah. Let me ask you, and congratulations on submitting the film to the Oscar.
Thank
My
you.
my guess is, because I've watched a lot of films and I've been around a lot of filmmakers all my life, and I think you have a winner because I truly believe it. I really do, because it's a powerful message, but it's so creatively done, like perfect. When I saw it, it was like I was watching passion. uh you're telling the story and it's all connected, and at the same time I see artist in its
Mm.
perfection coming from the illustrator and coming at the same time you as a director. It was like a perfect fit, you know. How long it take you to develop and to do this film, the whole process? Because it must have been
Mm.
time consuming.
It was, especially for us as a small team. I think we benefited in some regards from being a small team because you have limited resources, and a small team of really capable, passionate people allows you to iterate on things, to try different things, to try and figure it out, right? We were trying to do something unique here. Like, we're combining a traditional documentary where you typically shoot 100 hours of footage and then you sit in the editing suite and you start carving it up and let the story emerge sort of organically. We were combining that with an animated film where typically in animation, it's the opposite. You have everything locked before you begin. You lock your script, you lock all your storyboards, you build an animatic or a Leica reel, which is kind of like a movie of individual storyboards. So you have all your shots timed. So everything's planned out in great detail before you begin the animation, because animation is very time consuming and expensive. So as a small studio, for us to be like, well, you know what? We want to have an animated documentary, but we want the film also to be a sort of a study of this artist doing the animation that's in the film. That meant we had to go out and start animating scenes before we knew what the whole story was going to be. We're still observing Daxiong. We're still seeing his process play out. We're still interviewing people and watching him interview people and process it through his artwork. So we don't know exactly how this is all going to play out. We're not 100% sure that all the scenes we animate are going to end up in the film. And we certainly don't know how they're going to weave together. So this was like a really big kind of leap of faith. And so it was 6 years, but it's also like a small team. So we had animation director David Saillant and Yvonne Pinard as the producer overseeing the animation pipeline. We only had 4 people in the animation department, including the animation director. And if you look at like the end credits of like a Disney or a Pixar film, the animation credits roll, you can go get a coffee and come back and they're still rolling. So it's like, it's a really small team, and one guy did the lighting and rendering for the entire film, which I think is a record for an animated feature. It just doesn't happen. So you have a small team of people. It gives you that benefit of trying to figure out, how are you going to do this? How are you going to blend live action and animation? How are you going to go into these drawings and bring them alive in 3D animation and still give that kind of 2D illustrated feel? And how are you going to combine that with these real people in the real world, so that we see that this is real. We see the emotion on people's faces. We see them kind of like sharing this experience as Daxiong's drawing. So we understand it's kind of like a shared memory that's being built and constructed, right? So it took a while to kind of figure out that balance and to figure out how to do the transitions. But it was because of that kind of like leap of faith that I think we were able to end up with something unique.
Yeah. Let me ask you a very important question. What do you think about China and their feelings towards the film? Do they know about this film, and have they said
Well,
anything?
they certainly do now. So here's the thing. The day after the film was selected by Canada as its entry for the Oscars in the international feature category, which you mentioned, the next day, Daxiong, the artist subject of the film, his name appeared on a list of banned authors in China. And he's been part of, I think, over 100 titles. He's published his own comic books. He's drawn for Jin Yong, the #1 comic or kung fu novelist in China. He's drawn Justice League and Star Wars. And so now he's basically persona non grata, and he's responsible for teaching materials in China as well. So with that, it means, books being removed from, bookstores, from educational institutions, from libraries, and these kinds of things. It's really unfortunate that the response to a film about censorship and misinformation is more censorship, but that is unfortunately what we're seeing here. We also know that his family members have been harassed, and pretty much everyone who has collaborated with him or wished to collaborate with him is also under some kind of pressure from the authorities, from the sounds of it. I mean, even making this film, we connected with Daxiong around a video game I mentioned. That video game was being published by Tencent, which is a really big media company in China. And we were making this film, and our game disappeared from the storefronts with Tencent. And we were told the Chinese government visited them and forced them to cut ties with our company. And I was asked, are you doing something not aligned with the Chinese government direction? My wife's family members were harassed. She still has family in Northeast China. They were harassed and told, we know what you're up to overseas. So this kind of like veiled threat. So definitely, I would say that they're aware of what we're trying to do. And it's very unfortunate that a film that shines light on intimidation tactics and repression is met with simply more intimidation and more censorship and more repression.
Yeah, you would think that, people that do films, especially documentaries, a pedestal for a voice, a platform to tell your story, and, the right story. And
Mm-hmm.
and my point of view, like watching it, I took a lot of heart, because I really don't remember that happening. But then again, there's been a lot of stuff that opened my eyes through watching documentary over the years. So
Mm-hmm.
it really
Well,
hit.
that's the thing with a story like this, is that until we were able to have people who can share the story and bring it to life, like Daxiong, who's willing to go on this personal journey and bring it to life through his art, and the other survivors who tell their stories, and in particular, the one actual participant, Mr. White, who's able to get out of China. I mean, we're very fortunate from the standpoint of the film that he was able to get out, because before that, all it could be really is a news story, hey,
Right.
this happened, Falun Gong adherents hijacked the state television. That's unprecedented. And then it's like, well, what happened? Why did they do it? We don't know. The people are all in prison, or they're dead, or, they're under house arrest and we can't reach them. Right. So this is the thing, is that it's actually very difficult for these people to tell their story. And that's why, despite the kind of pressure and intimidation and all the stuff that we face, from a business standpoint, and harassment of sort of relatives in China and this kind of thing, we know that what we face pales in comparison to what these people have already endured in order to tell their story. And that's why it's important that we work together to help lend them a voice, to be able to shine a light on what's going on in China.
Right. How did you get everybody together, like in the same page, to tell the
So
story?
step by step. So I mean, here's the thing. Ethically, as a documentary filmmaker, you cannot. I just don't think you can twist somebody's arm to tell their story, especially when they're dealing with trauma, potentially with torture, and especially when this is could potentially expose them to further pressure, intimidation, and all of this. So you come to the project with that mindset of like a do no harm mindset. But then very quickly, what I learned is that not only these people were willing, they were adamant that they wanted to tell their story. I mean, first off, we don't need to tell them the risks. They're telling us what they've already endured. So they're educating us on what the risk factors are here. And at the same time, they're saying, I went through all of this so that I could tell the story. Let me tell this story. There's other people around me who died because they tried to tell this story. And I need to be able to carry that on. That's what I can do for them. That's all I can do for them. So this is one standpoint. They had this really strong drive of wanting to tell this story. My wife as well, who's not from the Falun Gong community and doesn't practice Falun Gong, but she looks at this as, one, she does care about the mistreatment of Falun Gong practitioners in China, and two, and she says this is for Chinese people in general. Like if atrocities like this can take place under the radar and people can't even talk about them, and if we can't question the official narratives that are so filled with hate and are fueling these kind of atrocities, then there's a problem for all Chinese people. This is not an issue just with Falun Gong. And we've seen it. We've seen it in how the Uyghurs have been treated in the northwest of China, the Tibetans from time to time, the demonization of all of the people trying to protect their freedoms in Hong Kong. And then even in terms of how mainstream Chinese people have been treated during COVID with these very extensive, like draconian lockdown rules and constant poking and prodding and just really no respect for human dignity or human rights in terms of how they've been treated. People can see that this is not just an issue of Falun Gong anymore. This is the nature of how the regime just disrespects and mistreats its own people.
Wow. Wow. What message do you have for the audience out there regarding this film? Like what specific message do you have for everyone?
I think at the heart, this is a film about the courage that's required to speak up and to speak the truth in the face of injustice. We often see things that aren't right, and circumstances are not always convenient for us to do something or say something about it. There might be sort of pressure or peer pressure, social pressures, whatever it is, to go along with a sort of a convenient narrative or whatnot, or the widely accepted narrative. But I think doing that has consequences. And this is an extreme case where we see how the absolute lack of ability to question anything and this kind of prevailing narrative, which is founded in hate, fueled massive atrocities against a group of people that really did not deserve to face that. So this is an extreme case. We seldom face the same kind of danger to speak out, but I think it's something that is still universal and human in our experience, and we can understand the courage that's required. And that's why I think it resonates with people widely. I mean, beyond that sort of like broad message that I hope people take away, I think it also shines a light on religious freedom issues and the persecution of Falun Gong in China. And I think that's a positive. People can pay attention to that because, as I mentioned, it isn't just Falun Gong. We see the treatment, the way the regime treats Falun Gong is the way that the regime in China treats everybody. And so that should concern all of us.
Yeah. How long has Falun Gong been around?
So it was a practice that, as I understand, was introduced from sort of one student to like one teacher to one student traditionally, but then it was adapted and popularized by a man named Li Hongzhi, who comes from Changchun City, where this story takes place. And that was done in 1992. And so it was brought to the public at that time. It happened in the midst of kind of a Qigong boom in China. So these Qigong exercises, kind of slow moving Chinese yoga looking things,
Right.
they had traditionally been part of more religious or spiritual self-refinement practices in China. But after the communists took over in China in 1949, it's an officially atheist regime. They were very much opposed to religion. They would, destroy the temples, force the monks to marry. They were at odds with religion from the beginning. And so what happened was, in the aftermath of one of the major political campaigns in China, the Cultural Revolution, in the mid 70s, there was this kind of resurgence of these practices, but they adopted the name of Qigong, which basically just means energy practice. And that way they kind of avoided this spiritual or religious connotation. So they were actually encouraged at the time. Okay, this is Chinese culture. Go ahead. Maybe it helps to reduce some of the burden on the healthcare system. The country's a mess right now. They encouraged it, tolerated it, and Falun Gong emerged in the midst of that. So it was introduced publicly in 1992. It became the most popular among the Qigong practices, but its rise was meteoric. That basically we had tens of millions, some estimates say even potentially close to 100 million people, which is more than the members of the Communist Party. And Falun Gong included this sort of spiritual component. It's based on these tenets of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. It has sort of like a self-cultivation, self-refinement philosophy or ideas to it. And so I think the party looked at something that was growing very, very quickly, and it had a philosophical component to it that the party didn't control. And that's a concern for the party that wants to control all belief, all religion, all ideology. And this is where I think the tension came, and then eventually a full-scale crackdown and persecution.
Wow. Wow. Well, I got to tell you something. I'm going to say something to you right now. And I wrote this myself because I was just so blown away with the film, and so taken by it. You know, it's a great film, powerful film, amazing animation, artistic perfection. Okay, power with illustration. You told a story. You sold me on it. It hit my heart and soul. I can honestly say that you took the art of film to a new level. All I could say is congratulations and well done. And I wish you all the best of luck. And I hope to God that you win. you know, that
Thank
go-
you so much. That is very touching. Thank you for sharing that with me.
because I think this should be told. This story should be told. And I thank you for bringing it to light. And God bless you. And you know what? I'm not going to say I wish you luck, because it's not luck. It's just connecting the dots, my friend, and you did it. So congratulations to
you.
all of you. God bless you,
Thank you.
and have a good night or day or whatever it is. Where
Oh, it's night in London, so that was perfect. Thank you so much. Really
okay.
enjoyed speaking with you and really appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless.
Bye.